The only thing that's ever changed about the scammer playbook in the last 200 years or so is the fact that instead of writing letters to people, they started writing text messages. Laura Haviland was an abolitionist who, in 1845, exposed a scammer when he tried to kidnap one of his former slaves. Hi, my name is Jeremy, and welcome to Elwyn Studios, where we explore stories of great American heroes throughout history. Elsie Hamilton was one of Dr. John Chester's slaves. But when she found out that she might be sold without her children or her husband, she decided to run away. Because her husband was a free man, he and their youngest daughter were able to escape as well. But they left two of their daughters in Tennessee. And after several years without hearing anything from them, they decided to contact a friend down south to see how their kids were doing. Here's where the scam comes in. Dr. Chester, Elsie's old master, apparently also worked at the post office, and he found their letter. Because he wanted the Hamiltons back as his slaves, he decided to write back to them saying that their kids were safe, and that he wanted their location and a little bit about their life so that when he went to visit the kids, then he would be able to tell them about their parents. After they didn't reply for a bit, Dr. Chester decided to write another letter. But because the Hamiltons told Laura Haviland, a woman that they stayed with for a few years after they got out, that they wrote a letter, she told them to stop writing any more letters to the South because they had no idea who was going to open them and who was going to see the contents inside. They followed her advice for a few weeks, but after a while, they really wanted to hear how their daughters were doing. So they wrote another letter, this time talking about what they were doing and their past life in the Free States, what they were planning for the future, as well as exactly where they were living then. A few days later, a man from the South came to their house inquiring about a horse that had been lost. Then a couple nights later, 3 men almost raided another house, but they found out that they weren't actually living there and left right away. As the kidnappers were pulling away, they fell into a 10-foot deep ditch. They broke their wagon and hurt their horses. Now they had no getaway vehicle, so they limped to the nearby town and started working on Plan B. The Hamiltons got another letter saying that their friend was on his way to visit them when he got really sick, and so he was in a nearby town and wanted them to come visit him instead. After receiving the letter, they decided to send Laura, her son Daniel, and a man named James Martin, who looked like Willis Hamilton, to the town to see if it was safe. When they arrived at the hotel, where their allegedly sick friend was staying, they all wanted to go upstairs together, but the porter only let who he thought was Willis Hamilton go upstairs. So James, who they thought was Willis Hamilton, went upstairs on his own, only to find that he was being held at gunpoint by 3 men. The leader of the crew was Dr. John Chester, Elsie's scammer and former master. When the doctor found out that James wasn't Willis Hamilton or even a former slave, he decided to try and bribe him. James, in order to find out more information, said he was interested. Meanwhile, Laura Haviland and her son were anxiously waiting downstairs. After 2 hours, Laura finally convinced the porter to bring James back downstairs, saying that her son had a meeting with him. But they were all being watched very carefully. So Daniel and James went into the dining room to have their meeting, while Laura tried to go upstairs herself, but the porter said that she could only talk to the man's doctor. The doctor turned out to be Dr. Chester himself, pretending to be someone else. Without either of them giving away who they actually were, Laura convinced the doctor to show her the patient. He took her to a room upstairs with an armchair in the corner with a man sleeping there, and a bed with a man lying there with a towel over his face. The towel was damp with vinegar, which was, according to the doctor, supposed to draw out the fever. Laura checked his pulse and found it way too strong for a man who had been in a fever for 7 days and was diagnosed to die within the next 24 hours or so. On top of that, the man didn't fit the description given by the Hamiltons at all. He was too tall and he was too thin. Plus, the man sleeping in the armchair in the corner, he looked slightly like the man who was spying on them a few days earlier. But Laura was in too deep now. She had to figure out a way to make them think she didn't know this was a trap. So what better way to get out than by the way she got in? She decided to write a letter to fool the letter scammers. Laura told the doctor that she would tell the Hamiltons to come as soon as possible, and to make things easier for them, she would lend them some of her old clothes. Specifically, she would give Elsie an old dress of hers, and she would give the children some aprons and some flannels as well. In her letter, she wrote that the black dress was in the south bedroom, and the black dress and the south bedroom didn't exist, and that there was more clothes in the bureau in the west bedroom, which also didn't exist. It worked perfectly. The doctor slash scammer slash former slave owner slash carriage wrecker had no idea that Laura Haviland knew exactly what his plan was. Laura wasn't the only abolitionist who had to use a slave hunter's methods in order to outwit them. You can click on this video here to learn about a man who wrecked his own ship with the slave hunters in order to protect the fugitives on his boat.